Northern Australia is under threat of a new wave of animal extinctions. A report released this week documents the decline of mammals in the north with a focus on the Northern Territory. It shows that many native mammals will become extinct in the next 10 to 20 years. Dr John Woinarski is one of the authors of the report and I spoke to him earlier today. Dr John Woinarski, thanks for joining us.
That pleasure.
How bad is the situation?
With native mammals in Northern Australia, it's a really devastating situation at the moment. Many species seem to be plunging towards extinction, declining over very extensive areas and very rapidly as well. Australia's got the worst history of mammal extinctions in the world. No other country's suffered so many extinctions. And in Central Australia, we've lost almost a third of our native mammals, mostly in the period 30 to 50 years ago. And those extinctions at 22 odd species happened at a time before we were sort of aware of any conservation movement, before we knew how to manage the landscape, and before the community really cared, I guess. And what we're trying to do here is try to avert that terrible, trying to avert what happened then, now. We want to learn lessons from those extinctions. We want to make sure that we don't repeat that terrible loss.
Talking about extinction, you were saying that a very short time span before we see some species being wiped out completely?
Certainly on current trends, that's highly likely in 10 to 20 years, I think, yes.
And what kind of mammals are we talking about?
Strangely, it's the really inconspicuous ones, the possums, bandicoots, rodents, quolls, species like that. I mean, many people think of mammals largely as kangaroos and koalas and really obvious things, but these are the smaller ones that most people don't really see or appreciate.
So what's the significance of these mammals? What will we notice if they do get extinct?
Their ecological role is a little uncertain. Some of them certainly are very important in terms of seed dispersal, as providing vital steps in the food chain and are really important that way. Some of them maybe won't have any purpose and we could lose them, but without sort of really noticing. But it's part of our heritage. It's a really important part of our culture, and for Aboriginal people in particular, many of these species are important. So we might not notice the effect of their loss, but it's a loss of our heritage, which is really important, I think.
How is it that you went about monitoring the animal numbers?
Yeah, we've been monitoring these things through surveys and trappings for 20, 30 years almost now, in a really systematic way, so that we know very clearly which species are declining where and at what rate. And we go back to the same spot year after year after year. And whereas previously this was a paradise for us, it was for a biologist, this was a wonderful part of the world to be in, such a diversity of species. Now we go out and more often than not we get nothing, and I find that really devastating.
Have you got any examples of a mammal in the Northern Territory that you've watched decline in numbers?
Yeah, there's many of these names don't mean anything to anybody, and that's part of the problem, and that's part of why we're trying to publicise this issue. The one that's declining most rapidly and which we've had a lot to do with is a thing called the brush-tailed rabbit rat, which is a sort of a guinea pig-sized thing, but it's got a beautiful tail, beautiful feathery tail as well. It's a really nice creature, very docile, inoffensive, and we've just watched it disappear place after place over the last decade.
What is it that's causing these animal populations to decline?
That's been a really important part of our research. We don't really want to simply demonstrate a problem. We want to try to understand what the causes of the problem are. And to that extent, it's like a detective story in some ways. We've been trying to figure out who the culprits were, and through a whole range of different sort of research. There's no simple solution. It seems to be a conflation of a whole series of threatening processes affecting any of these species at the same time. So factors which are involved include fire, feral cats, cane toads to some extent, and possibly disease. But the most likely culprits are inappropriate fire regimes and predation by feral cats, and those two actually interact quite a lot.
When we're talking about inappropriate fire regimes, is this in any way an argument against traditional burning off?
Oh, very much the opposite. I think what we're witnessing in many parts of Northern Australia is extensive fires that occur mostly in the dry season and burn very completely and very intensively. And Indigenous traditional fire regimes seem to be much more small scale, less hot, and leave many areas unburnt as well. So what our department, a whole lot of Indigenous groups and others, Bushfires Council, have been trying to do over the last 4 or 5 years is to reinstitute many of those Indigenous fire regimes, and that does seem to be having a beneficial impact. But I think it's, for the small mammals, it's a necessary step, but not sufficient of itself.
How is it that you're hoping your report will be accepted by governments?
I mean, nobody likes a problem, but what we're trying to do is trying to identify the problem as clearly as possible and to come up with a series of steps towards a solution. And one of those steps is to, I guess, get some community ownership of the problem or recognition that there is a problem. Because many of these things are really inconspicuous, not many people have noticed their decline. So we're, based on our scientific evidence, are saying that this really is a serious problem. We have a series of policy steps which can underlie responses, and that includes the Territory 2030 program, which has a specific target and objective of no extinctions in the Northern Territory, and that's a really good, useful first step. We've got a series of legislative and regulatory responses as well. For example, listing species as threatened, and we've listed many of those, and that's a start that provides some resources. But we do have to now, I think, work with landholders to get better fire regimes, and we do have to actually start instituting particular intensive feral cat management focus issues, and that's a really hard one to do.
Dr John Woinarski, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.